Hello and welcome to this week's edition of 50 Years Serving the Island, a series of programmes featuring highlights from Manx Radio's first 5 decades serving the public in the Isle of Man. In 1968, Manx Radio was transferred into public ownership to become the island's public service broadcaster. And this week on the programme, we go back to 2013 to bring you part of a Christmas edition of In Their Own Time. Looking back at Christmas in days gone by, the programme was presented by John Kennaugh.
Dear countrymen, whate'er is left to us of ancient heritage, of manners, speech, of humours, polity, the limited horizon of our stage, old love, hope and fear, all this I fain would fix upon the page. Hello and welcome to In Their Own Time. I'm John Kennaugh. On the programme tonight, we'll hear about times past, the people of old and the changes in the landscape around us. Christmas is a very special time of the year when families come together to share in the joy of the season. Gathered around the table, they share jokes and stories and reminisce about Christmases past. One of the most colourful traditions this time of the year is the decorating of the Christmas tree. Every year the trees can be seen taking pride of place in villages and towns throughout the island, as well as in people's own homes, decked in shining lights and sparkling ornaments. But what of the trees themselves? Dougie Allen has had a lifelong association with the island's trees through his career with the Forestry Board, which spanned 5 decades. He shares his earliest memories of Christmas trees as a boy.
The first trees that I remembered, we were living in Duke Street, and it was certainly before I was 6, because we moved then. And we always had a Christmas tree. And when I come to think about it now, I often wonder where it came from, because my father worked on the highway board, so it doesn't take a great deal of imagination. But yes, the tree went up every year. And the frightening thing of it now, when I think back, we used naked candles, homemade decorations, made out of paper and twisted on a needle to make icicles. The other thing was my mother used to save all the year round the silver paper of chocolates, different colours, and she'd get a head of corn. The heads of the corn were individually wrapped with the different colours. But we also had some wonderful glass decorations. And before the Second World War, my father worked as gardener at Farm Hill at Braddon for Mr. White, who was the surveyor of the highway board. And every Christmas they put a tree up, it was decorated, and every Christmas the tree was taken down and it was thrown out with the decorations. Mrs. White never saved the decorations. And my mother had said to her several times, and she was told if she wished to take the decorations off the trees, she could have them. Well, we had some of them up until probably about 2 years ago. And you think about them, they were 70 years old.
Really?
And they were glass. And of course, every year they used to get put away in cotton wool and in a cardboard box. And each year they were brought out, and each year they were getting one less and one less and one less. Unfortunately, as they were getting broken.
You were involved then in actually providing Christmas trees. Where did that all start?
Well, the first recollections, again, from my point of view, were when I joined the Forestry Board in the early 1960s. In those days, they virtually cut them from the crop. There was very few specialised areas where just Christmas trees were grown. Probably the only little patches would be the likes of the old nursery on the bottom of Llewellyn, and the nursery up at South Barrule. The rest of them just came from the trees that were planted for a main crop eventually.
What was demand like in those days, Doug?
It was fairly good, but there was quite a good supply of trees as well. And I can certainly remember 2 or 3 winters where we exported trees to
Really?
Preston Market. They went away on a big flat, well, I'm saying several hundred, probably 1,000 or more. That was common practice for several years.
So was there any particular skill in choosing which trees you would harvest for as a Christmas tree, or was it just the one you liked the look of?
Well, you always looked for a well-shaped tree with an individual leader, nicely spaced branches, and a good, strong green colour.
Now, as you say, that was just from the crop, so there was no specialist planting for Christmas trees in those days?
Not really, no. That really only came in, I think, in the late 60s, early 70s, where quite considerable areas were then planted. The fields around about the sawmill at St John's was one example. Once we stopped doing our own nursery growing of trees, they were turned over to grown Christmas trees. Big areas down at Ballaugh, and various other plots through other plantations. So it became quite a specialised thing then. And there was also a swing as well from the Norway spruce, which had been the traditional Christmas tree. There was a certain amount of pine sold as well, which was really an American thing. And of course the demand increased considerably for non-drop Christmas trees. And they became the prime tree to grow, really, because, again, tree for tree, you got twice the price for them.
The reason we didn't need non-drop in the early days, Doug, surely was the houses weren't heated the same as they are today.
Well, exactly. A normal Norway spruce probably lasted 3 weeks, maybe even 4 weeks.
Now, I can remember the wagons starting to go through the village of St John's laden with Christmas trees. Where would they be heading for in those days, Doug?
The trade in those days was the village shop or the general fruiterers, and the likes of Peel would be Gales Fair at the top of Stanley Road. Virtually any shop that was prepared to take 5 or 10 trees, we were prepared to supply. Also, some of the markets in Douglas were selling trees as well for us.
The Christmas trees grow in some remote areas, Doug, which makes them targets for those who are looking for, well, a cheap tree maybe.
Oh, definitely. And certainly we used to run a Christmas tree patrol of a night.
Really?
And we'd have 3 or 4 guys, north and south. And you didn't do it every night because you sort of kept a little bit of a regularity to it, and you went out for a couple of hours and did a trip round about all the plots that you thought might get visited, shall we say. Yes. And indeed, in some cases, they were visited. And I can remember certainly a couple of interesting chases, shall we say. I can remember chasing a guy one night from the Round Table all the way down Llewellyn Back Road, out through St John's, and he vanished across the traffic lights at Ballacrane, and I got stopped. So, shall we say we chased them, but seldom did we catch anybody, shall we say.
Right, but they knew you were about.
Oh, indeed, yes.
And that may have been the deterrent, was it, Doug?
I think it was, yes. The police sort of kept an eye open as well, so we did it in conjunction with the police.
Times move on. Things have changed now, but you'll still have a Christmas tree.
Well, if we don't have a tree this year, it would probably be the first time in 60-odd years. And I think, as with everything else, it's not only do you look as well, it's the children and certainly the grandchildren that look for it now.
But Doug, it's a wonderful tradition, and we hope it keeps going. You're out of it now, but you still look forward to putting the Christmas tree up at Christmas time.
Oh, indeed, indeed, and I suppose will do for as long as possible.
Dougie Allen. Now, Christmas morning can be a busy one in the kitchen in many households, but the preparations for the season have traditionally started quite some time before the day itself. As Doris Cameen recalls from her own childhood days on the family farm in Sulby.
Well, we used to have the hen turkeys, and of course the geese as well. And they would be laying the eggs. Mum would get these, hold them until the hen turkey and the goose, they would get clucky, as we called it, and the eggs would be put under the hen turkey, and the geese, they would line their nests with the down, and they would rear all their own young. Then, of course, when it come towards the Christmas time, we had to move the geese into the hacket at night, and as far as the turkeys were concerned, they had to be brought into the house. And old Joss, the dog, he was very good, because the hen turkey would draw the young ones away. They'd go for miles, and he would call the dog and tell him to go and find the turkeys. His nose would go to the ground. He'd find out which way they'd gone, and he would come back with them all. You just had to be there, ready to shut them in the house. When it come to Christmas, my aunts and uncles would come up to the Grange to help, because Dad used to kill the birds. In the stables, there would be 2 stalls were absolutely cleaned, and the turkeys and chickens, the feathers from them would be in one stall, and in the other stall would be the feathers from the geese and the ducks.
Because they were special, weren't they?
They were special because people used to come up with big sacks to get the feathers, because in those days people used to have feather beds. We'd keep some for ourselves, and then they would take all the rest away. Then these birds would be hung up for a bit to drain, and then they would be brought into the back kitchen. Now there, usually the head and the feet would be cut off. Mum used to have this giant roasting tin, and into that she would pour methylated spirits and set fire to it. And my mother and aunt would turn the body of the bird over this flame so that all the down would be all singed. Then that bird would be handed to me, and we had a big bath there and big square pieces of singlet, of Dad's old singlet. I had to wash that bird to get all the singe down off. And then once that bird was all nicely done, it was dried off and it was taken to the table where all the aunts and uncles would be dressing these birds. One of the jobs I used to hate was getting the fat of the innards of a goose.
Oh, God. The goose grease dollars.
Goose grease, because that was all rendered down.
It was very valuable.
It was valuable, because if you had a bad cold or anything like that, this would be rubbed on your chest. And you stunk to high heaven. Oh, it was terrible. And then another use for it was Dad had hobnail boots, and he would clean those boots and then put goose grease on them.
So the geese were dressed then?
Yes, the geese and the turkeys, they were all dressed. Then these boxes that Mum used to get from Willie T the grocer, they were put down the parlour, they were there most of the year, and these would come out, and Mum would put a lining of grease-proof paper in these boxes for my uncle to come down, and he used to work on the steam packet King Orry. And what would happen was people from Liverpool and Birkenhead used to ask for our turkeys mostly, now and again a goose, and Mum would weigh it. She'd put the person's name on the box. This was all packed up, and my uncle Frank Oates used to come with a big sack. He'd put these boxes down in the sack, and he would then have to put this on his back, go down to the Ginger Hall Hotel, where he'd get on the bus into Ramsey, and then from Ramsey up through to Douglas, because they lived at Norwood Drive. When he would go on the boat then, he would take this sack with him, and distribute the poultry in Liverpool or Birkenhead, and people would pay him, and then the next time he would come to the Grange, he would pay the money to Mum and get another load.
You're listening to 50 Years Serving the Island, a series of programmes featuring highlights from Manx Radio's archives during the station's first 5 decades serving the public in the Isle of Man. Today we bring you part of a Christmas edition of In Their Own Time. Presented by John Kennaugh, the programme was first broadcast in 2013.
With the turkeys put out then all through the village and the district to neighbours and friends?
Yes, and there was Eric T. the butcher and his wife used to come up to the Grange, because once these birds had all been dressed, they were put on these big shelves out in the dairy, because it was lovely and cold there. And then, of course, he would come, and all these birds then would be loaded into the van, and they were taken then to the butcher shop in Ramsey. Other people used to come up to buy them. So Mark College used to come because he'd have a load of turkeys or goose or something like that as well. This was for Ballymannock Mansion. Of course, we had mostly goose, I think we had, but there were people who wanted ducks as well. So chickens, hardly anybody wanted a chicken, but it was a very, very busy time of year.
Now, busy as it was, your mother had other enterprises as well at Christmas, didn't she?
Oh, yes.
This would start earlier than the poultry. Tell us about it, Doris.
Yes, this would be around about end of October, beginning of November. And my mother and aunt used to be out in the back kitchen with these big bowls. And inside there would be all the mixture for Christmas puddings. And they had these white bowls into which they would put the mixture once it's all been mixed up. And then they would have these big squares of pudding cloths, would go over the top, and string tied very tightly under the rim of the bowl. Then the 4 corners of the cloth would come up and tied up in the middle. Those were what was used. You would grip the top of the bowl, and that was put down in the boiling water.
In the boiler?
In the boiler. Now, this boiler, all year round, was used for boiling washed potatoes. So it meant that when you come to boil the puddings, that boiler had to be absolutely washed out time and time again before you put the water in to boil. That would be down there most of the day.
How did the water boil?
Well, this boiler was shaped like a giant egg cup, a big black thing. And down at the waist of it, there would be a door. And in there you would put coal and wood, and you'd have to boil this water before you put the puddings down in this water. And then at night, I can remember at night going with my mother and father and my aunt, and they'd have these big trays. You had to carry a lantern because up at the Grange there was no electricity. And there you took the cover off the boiler, and using these tongs, lifted the puddings out and put them on the trays. I had to run ahead of them to get the back door open so that they could walk in with these trays and put them on the big table.
And what happened to the puddings then?
Aunts and uncles used to get them, and Mum used to use them as Christmas presents.
They were Christmas presents?
They were Christmas presents, yes.
Doris Cameen, remembering her childhood days on the family farm during the approach to Christmas. While the poultry orders created a heightening of activity on the farm during the period up to Christmas, there were some jobs on the farm that had to be done every day, including Christmas Day. Hubert and Doreen Cameen have spent more than 50 years running a dairy farm at Bolacrane. For many of those years, carrying out milk deliveries to customers in the surrounding area.
I can remember, John, when we started here farming in 1962, Christmas Day was just like any other busy day in our life. The animals had to be fed, watered, cleaned out and bedded down. We were very lucky to have 4 daughters who were understanding, and they knew that all these jobs had to be done before they could open their presents.
But you had a special job, Doreen. You had a milk round and you were supplying a lot of people with milk. Where did all that process start on Christmas morning?
On Christmas morning, we were fortunate to be woken up very early, of course, with the children, all looking to see had Santa been round. Their stockings were filled, tangerine in the toe, and the Christmas white mouse with the string tail on it, and the big thing, the chocolate orange in the segments. That all got the round too. And then out we would go after that. Out we would go as we had to get the milk round done, all the vans loaded, and out to deliver round the village.
How long would the milking take on Christmas morning?
Oh, those days it would take about an hour. We wouldn't be dealing in so many. Just later on, when we got more rounds, we employed more staff to help us.
And was milk bottled in those days? Was it into glass bottles?
It was bottled into glass bottles, yes. Yes, we did that as well, yes.
Before they were loaded into the van?
Before they were loaded into the van, yes, I'll say.
And the van's loaded then, and now you're ready for off. And which way did you head?
We're ready for off, and we would head down the Curragh Road and right round the village. Back home we would come then.
So when you went round, did you find that other families that you were delivering to, what time of the morning was this when you were out with the milk?
This would be early in the morning, yes.
What was early for a milk roundsman?
Oh, well, not quite as early as usual, but by the time the stockings and things had been looked at, it'd be after 7 anyway by the time we got away.
That's early.
Yes.
And when you went round to the customers, were they up? Were the children up?
No, they weren't. No, there'd be lights on in the bedrooms, where the children would be. But the night before Christmas, I always believe that preparation is the key to success. So the spuds would be all peeled and they'd be in the pots lined up on the draining board. The veggies would be all there. Turkey would be ready to put in the oven, so that when the work was done outside, we would come straight in then, get everything in process, the dinner in process. Then we would have the opening of the presents.
So that was when your family day started, after the milking, the cleaning, the feeding,
yes.
And the deliveries had all been done.
All been done, yes. We would come in then. That would be getting us up to nearly 12 o'clock then, I'll tell you.
Was it really?
Yes, oh yes.
A housewife then started to get Christmas dinner ready.
Yes, but then it was all prepared. It was ready to go in, so we could join the children and stay in. I remember I used to be very organised with pen and paper, trying to get which present had been given, so when the time came to give thank you notes, they would be able to know and thank the person personally for that present. But it all went haywire. Plans went out the window of that. Later on, we did stop the Christmas delivery and put double out on the Christmas Eve, and that relieved the pressure a bit for us then. That was when we got a bit more staff. But of course the staff were all given the day off anyway on Christmas Day to be with their families, so we did have a hard day, Christmas Day, a tiring day.
Before you would get finished the milk round, Doreen, there would be people up and busy going about their bit of Christmas Day business. In those days, a milk roundsman tended to sort of walk into the kitchen with the milk. Did you ever come on any families getting themselves ready for Christmas Day like that?
Oh yes, and you would be offered a glass of wine, which I hated anyway, and I wouldn't have that. I'd have ginger ale, yes, I'd have a glass of that with them and wish them all the best, for Christmas.
And were people usually appreciative of having their milk delivered on Christmas morning?
Yes, they
or
were.
was it just taken as being routine?
No, they were very appreciative of it. In fact, when we did stop it, they were a tiny bit upset, I must say. They were used to having it on Christmas Day.
Yeah.
You see, their bread, everything was delivered, wasn't it? Christmas Day, just the same, yeah.
So here we are, back home again now after the milk round and into the family life now, Christmas Day, getting Christmas dinner ready.
And the girls all came back with their children as they got older. They came back with their children, and they loved to lay the Christmas table. And of course, the best Christmassy cloth had to be brought out for that day. The best china plates dusted down, and the silver cutlery took from the dresser out of the box, and each placed with a cracker at each table plate.
So this was a very special family day.
Oh, lovely, yes. The table would be groaning, yes. And in the centrepiece, one of the girls would have an arrangement, but they'd be gone over the top with it and you wouldn't be able to see the person opposite you. So when dinner time came to be served, we had to just quietly remove that so we could get the tureens and things out on the table.
Now, that would go on through the day, and I mean, the milking needed to be done again in the
Well,
afternoon.
sometimes, as I say, we'd have 14 in for dinner quite easily. And also 3 years in a row, I remember our neighbours, our elderly neighbours over there, the wind had taken their electric power down, and of course they would come and join us as well. So it was the more the merrier. And crackers would be getting pulled and riddles called, impossible games played, nobody knowing the rules, but nobody worrying, happy as could be.
Now, out of that
Yeah.
lovely, happy family scene, and I could picture it in my mind,
Yes.
what was it like pulling wellies on and waterproofs to
Well-
go back out on the yard again?
Well,
in
when
the
all the
afternoon?
crackers were pulled and the after eights had been got out, and also a ritual we used to have, the little ones, one of the little ones would start their speaking debut by saying grace for us. And then another thing, a ritual we have, they would go round the table and each person would say what sort of a year they'd had and what their hopes were for next year. And it was lovely. It was quite emotional. And yes, after it was all finished, and there'd be a scrabble, I remember, for the after, no, not the after eight, the rose of chocolate, the triangle one with the green paper on. That would be fun, getting that. But we'd all go then, yes, off with the high heels then, on with the boiler suit, out to the cow house. The milking had to be done first. Then the cows had to be fed, and they would all have turnips cut by the hand cutter, moots as they call them. They'd have a half a wicker basket each in their trough and a bit of hay in their hay rack. I would be doing that, and Hubert would be doing the milking then. And we would get cleared up outside as soon as we could, just doing the bare essentials, as least as we could get away with, you
But
know.
nothing neglected.
Oh, nothing neglected, and everything fed, yes, it was.
Yubi, can I come to you? Because you can probably go back, like I can, a long way to your father's time and Christmas at Kennaugh when you were a family home there. What was Christmas like there? Was it, you would always have electricity in the house, I would think, in your time?
We didn't have in the very first years, but I don't remember much about that sort of time, because I can always remember going to bed with candles, and we had lanterns out in the cowsheds.
How difficult was that, to do yard work like Doreen's just been describing, with just a hurricane lantern in your hand?
You know, you'd trip up occasionally, as you say, because the light was poor. We were very fortunate that we had some of the first electric on the farms in the area, and although the lights were very sparse by comparison to today, maybe one light in a cowshed, it was a marvellous boon compared with what we had previous. And Christmas Day was like any other day up to a point, but I always think that small farmers worked harder on Christmas Day than any other day in the year, because especially those who maybe employed some labour, because everybody tried to give their staff the Christmas Day off with their family, so the poor farmer and his wife had all the extra work to do. The only big advantage was that you were doing the work at home. The unfortunate part was that occasionally friends would call in who had the day off and for a chatter and wish you all the best and basically hinder things,
Yes.
which made the day even harder. But Christmas Day has always been, perhaps I think, for farmers, the hardest working day of the year, because it's the winter time when all the animals are in and all need feeding.
Hubert and Doreen Cameen, remembering their days making milk deliveries on Christmas morning. That's so the coming age, lost in the empire's mass, yet happily longing for their fathers, here may see as in a glass what they held dear. May say, 'twas thus and thus they lived, and as the time flood onward rolls, secure an anchor for their Celtic souls.
You've been listening to this week's edition of 50 Years Serving the Island, where we featured a Christmas edition of In Their Own Time, presented by John Kennaugh and first broadcast in 2013. And you'll shortly be able to hear this programme again, along with many other programmes and features from Manx Radio's archives by going to manxradio.com/portal.